Welcome to another peaceful journey through calm history. Tonight we explore the slow, methodical rhythms of daily life in ancient Greek city-states during the classical period. These ancient routines from over 2,000 years ago will guide you toward restful sleep through the gentle cadence of historical detail. Let us begin. With dawn in a typical Athenian household during the 5th century before Christ. The ancient Greek day started before sunrise with the gradual lightening of the eastern sky. Greek homes had no glass windows, only wooden shutters that covered openings in stone or mud brick walls. As dawn approached, these shutters were opened to let in the first pale morning light. Ancient Greek houses were built around central courtyards called peristyles. These courtyards were surrounded by covered walkways supported by simple columns. The courtyard was open to the sky and provided light and fresh air to the surrounding rooms. A small altar to the household gods stood in one corner of the courtyard where daily religious observances took place. Greek morning routines began with prayers to the gods. The head of the household approached the family altar shortly after sunrise. He poured a small amount of diluted wine or water onto the altar stones as an offering. He placed pieces of bread or barley cake on the altar. He recited traditional prayers asking for protection and blessing for his family throughout the coming day. Ancient Greek clothing was simple and practical for the Mediterranean climate. Men wore a chiton, which was a rectangular piece of linen or wool cloth draped over the body and fastened at the shoulders with bronze pins or brooches. The length of the chiton indicated social status. Short chitons reaching to the knees were worn by workers and slaves who needed freedom of movement. Long chitons reaching to the ankles were worn by wealthy citizens, philosophers, and priests who did not perform manual labor. The quality of cloth also indicated social position. Coarse wool or cheap linen was worn by poor people. Fine linen imported from Egypt or soft wool, dyed with expensive colors, was worn by the wealthy. Women wore a peplus, which was similar to the male chiton, but longer and more elaborately decorated. The peplus was made from a single rectangular piece of woolen cloth that was folded and pinned at the shoulders. A belt called a zone was tied around the waist to create the proper draping. Married women covered their heads with part of the peplus when appearing in public. Greek footwear consisted mainly of leather sandals held on the feet with straps. These sandals had thick soles to protect against rough stone pavements and country paths. Wealthy Greeks owned sandals decorated with metal ornaments or dyed leather. During cold weather or for traveling, Greeks wore closed shoes called kothanoi that covered the entire foot. Ancient Greek breakfast was a light meal eaten shortly after the morning prayers. This meal typically consisted of bread dipped in diluted wine, olives, goat cheese, and dried figs. The bread was made from barley flour for most people. Wheat bread was considered a luxury and was eaten mainly by wealthy families. Bread was baked in large loaves that lasted for several days. Greek olives were preserved in salt brine and eaten at every meal. Green olives were picked before full ripeness and had a sharp, bitter taste. Black olives were allowed to ripen fully on the tree and had a milder flavor. Olive oil was used for cooking, fuel for lamps, and personal hygiene. A typical household consumed several gallons of olive oil each month. Greek cheese was made from the milk of goats and sheep. Cow's milk was rarely used because cattle were expensive and difficult to maintain. Fresh cheese was eaten soon after making. Aged cheese was preserved by salting and could be stored for months. Hard cheese was grated over other foods or mixed with honey as a sweet treat. After the morning meal, Greek men began their daily activities according to their social class and occupation. Wealthy citizens who owned land worked by slaves often had no specific profession. Their income came from agricultural production, rents from urban property, or profits from trading ventures. These men spent their mornings in the agora discussing politics and conducting business. The agora was the central marketplace and political center of every Greek city. It was surrounded by covered walkways called stoas, where merchants displayed their goods and citizens gathered for conversation. The agora served multiple functions as a market, meeting place, and center of civic life. Only adult male citizens were allowed to participate fully in agora activities. Greek business transactions were conducted through personal relationships and individual reputation. Merchants knew their regular customers by name and extended credit based on trust and past dealings. Contracts were usually verbal agreements witnessed by other citizens. Written contracts existed but were used mainly for large transactions involving substantial amounts of money or property. Ancient Greek currency consisted of silver and bronze, coins minted by individual city-states. Each city used its own designs and weight standards. Athenian coins featured an owl, the sacred bird of Athena. Spartan coins were deliberately crude in design to discourage the accumulation of wealth. Money changers in the agora determined exchange rates for foreign coins. Greek weights and measures varied between different cities, creating complications for merchants engaged in long-distance trade. Standard measures had to be negotiated for each transaction between traders from different cities. Disputes over measurements were common and sometimes led to violence. Some cities appointed official inspectors to verify the accuracy of weights and measures used in their markets. Meanwhile, Greek women began their own daily routines within the confines of their households. Respectable women from good families rarely appeared in public except for religious festivals or family emergencies. They supervised household slaves, managed food preparation, and oversaw the education of young children. These responsibilities required considerable knowledge and organizational skill. Greek households employed slaves to perform most of the physical labor required for daily life. Female slaves helped with cooking, cleaning, childcare, and textile production. Male slaves accompanied their masters to the agora, carried heavy loads, and performed maintenance work around the house. The number of slaves owned by a family indicated their wealth and social status. Ancient Greek slave management required understanding of human psychology and practical economics. Slaves who were treated reasonably well worked more efficiently and caused fewer problems. Harsh treatment could lead to escape attempts, theft, or sabotage. Some slaves were given considerable responsibility and earned money that they could use to purchase their freedom eventually. Ancient Greek agriculture formed the economic foundation of most city-states and determined the rhythm of daily life for the majority of the population. Greek farmers worked small plots of land that had been passed down through families for generations. The Mediterranean climate provided hot, dry summers and mild, wet winters that shaped agricultural practices and crop selection. Greek soil was generally poor and rocky, requiring intensive labor to produce adequate crops. Farmers spent countless hours removing stones from fields and building terraces on hillsides to prevent erosion. The lack of natural fertility meant that fields had to be carefully managed through crop rotation and the application of animal manure to maintain productivity over time. Ancient Greek farming was dominated by three essential crops known as the Mediterranean triad: grain, grapes, and olives. These crops provided the basic necessities of life and formed the foundation of Greek diet and economy. Grain supplied daily bread and porridge. Grapes were fermented into wine for drinking and trade. Olives produced oil for cooking, lighting, and export. Greek grain crops included wheat and barley, with barley being much more common due to its ability to grow in poor soil and dry conditions. Wheat was preferred for making bread, but required better soil and more water than most Greek farmers could provide. Barley was hardy and reliable, but produced coarser bread that was considered inferior to wheat bread. Ancient Greek ploughing began in autumn when the first rains softened the hard, sun-baked soil of summer. Farmers used simple wooden ploughs reinforced with iron tips and pulled by teams of oxen or mules. These animals were expensive, and not every farmer could afford to own them. Poor farmers often shared animals with neighbors or worked as hired laborers for wealthy landowners. Greek sowing was done by broadcasting seeds by hand across freshly plowed fields. This method was wasteful because many seeds fell on rocks, paths, or other unsuitable areas where they could not germinate. However, it was the quickest method available and allowed farmers to plant large areas with limited labor. Seeds were saved from the previous year's harvest in carefully sealed containers. Ancient Greek irrigation was limited by geography and available technology. Most farmers relied entirely on seasonal rainfall to water their crops. Some areas near rivers or springs could divert water to fields through simple channels dug by hand. These irrigation systems required constant maintenance and careful allocation of water. Rights among different users. Greek vineyard cultivation required several years of preparation before vines began producing grapes suitable for winemaking. Young vines had to be carefully tended and protected from animals, weather, and disease. Mature vineyards needed regular pruning, cultivation, and pest control. The grape harvest was a community effort that brought families together for intensive work and social celebration. Ancient Greek wine production began immediately after the grape harvest, when the fruit was at peak ripeness. Grapes were crushed by treading with bare feet in large stone basins. The grape juice was then transferred to ceramic containers called amphorae for fermentation. This process took several weeks and required careful monitoring to ensure proper fermentation and prevent spoilage. Greek olive cultivation was a long-term investment that demanded patience and forward planning. Olive trees required many years to mature and reach full production. Once established, however, olive trees could produce fruit for centuries with proper care. The olive harvest occurred in late autumn and involved the entire community in gathering and processing the crop. Ancient Greek olive oil production used stone mills to crush olives into a paste, which was then pressed to extract the oil. The first pressing produced the highest quality oil used for cooking and personal hygiene. Subsequent pressings yielded lower grades of oil suitable for lighting lamps and industrial uses. The entire process required specialized equipment and skilled workers. Greek animal husbandry focused on sheep, goats, pigs, and poultry because these animals were well suited to the Mediterranean environment. Cattle were expensive to maintain and were used mainly for plowing and religious sacrifices. Sheep provided wool for clothing, milk for cheese, and meat for special occasions. Goats were hardy animals that could survive on poor pasture and steep terrain. Ancient Greek shepherding required extensive knowledge of weather patterns, pasture conditions, and animal behavior. Shepherds moved their flocks between summer and winter grazing areas according to seasonal cycles that had been established over many generations. They lived outdoors for months at a time, protecting their animals from predators and thieves. Greek wool production began with shearing sheep in late spring when the weather was warm and the wool was at its best quality. The fleece was washed to remove dirt and natural oils, then combed to align the fibers and remove tangles. Spinning was done with simple hand spindles, a process that was extremely time-consuming and required considerable skill to produce even thread. Ancient Greek weaving was performed on vertical looms that were set up in courtyards or covered work areas. These looms consisted of wooden frames that held the vertical warp. Threads, while horizontal weft threads, were woven through them to create cloth. Weaving was skilled work that took years to master, and complex patterns required exceptional expertise and artistic ability. Greek textile production was primarily the responsibility of women, who spent many hours each day spinning, weaving, and sewing to provide clothing and household textiles for their families. Wealthy households employed female slaves who specialized in textile work. The quality and quantity of textiles produced by a household reflected the family's economic status and social position. Ancient Greek food preservation was essential for surviving the winter months when fresh produce was not available. Meat was preserved by salting, smoking, or drying in the sun. Fish were salted immediately after being caught to prevent spoilage. Vegetables were dried or pickled in vinegar. Fruits were dried or made into preserves with honey, which served as the primary sweetener. Greek grain storage required protection from moisture, insects, and rodents that could destroy entire harvests. Grain was stored in large ceramic containers called poleis that were partially buried in the ground to maintain stable temperatures. These storage vessels had tight-fitting lids that were sealed with clay or wax. Regular inspection was necessary to detect problems before they spread. Ancient Greek honey collection provided the only sweetener available to most people. Honey was gathered from both wild bees and domesticated hives. Beekeeping required specialized knowledge of bee behavior and seasonal cycles. Honey was used in cooking, medicine, and the production of mead, a fermented beverage that was popular at religious festivals and social gatherings. Greek salt production was essential for food preservation and was obtained primarily through the evaporation of seawater. In shallow ponds along the coast, salt production required intensive labor during the hot summer months when evaporation rates were highest. Workers raked salt crystals from drying ponds and loaded them into containers for transport to inland markets where salt commanded high prices. Ancient Greek pottery production was one of the most important industries in the classical world, providing essential containers for cooking, storage, and transportation of goods. Every Greek household needed dozens of ceramic vessels for daily life, from large storage jars to small drinking cups. The pottery industry employed thousands of skilled craftsmen and generated significant wealth for major production centers like Athens. Greek pottery began with the careful selection and preparation of clay, which had to be collected from specific deposits that produced clay with the right working properties. Different types of clay were mixed together to achieve the desired consistency and firing characteristics. The clay was cleaned to remove stones and other impurities, then kneaded thoroughly to eliminate air bubbles that could cause cracking during firing. Ancient Greek pottery wheels were simple devices consisting of a flat disc mounted on a vertical spindle that was rotated by kicking with the foot. Operating a pottery wheel required considerable skill and coordination between the hands that shaped the clay and the foot that maintained the wheel's rotation, centering the clay properly on the wheel. was a critical technique that separated experienced potters from beginners. Greek pottery firing was done in kilns that could reach temperatures over 1000 degrees Celsius. The firing process required several days of continuous attention to maintain proper temperatures and atmospheric conditions. Fuel consumption was enormous, requiring large quantities of carefully selected and seasoned wood. Failed firings could destroy weeks of work and represented significant financial losses. Ancient Greek pottery decoration involved sophisticated painting techniques that created the distinctive black figure and red figure styles for which Greek pottery became famous throughout the ancient world. These decorations were not merely ornamental, but told stories from mythology, depicted scenes from daily life, and recorded historical events. Skilled pottery painters were highly regarded artists whose work was eagerly sought by collectors. Greek metalworking produced tools, weapons, jewelry, and coins using bronze, iron, silver, and gold. Bronze was an alloy of copper and tin that was easier to work than iron but required access to tin, which was imported from distant regions. Iron was harder than bronze and held a better edge for tools and weapons. But working iron required higher temperatures and greater technical skill. Ancient Greek blacksmithing was centered around the forge, a stone hearth that burned charcoal to achieve the intense heat needed for metal. Bellows made from animal skins provided the airflow necessary to reach and maintain high temperatures. The blacksmith heated metal until it glowed red hot, then hammered it into shape on an iron anvil while it was still malleable. Greek carpentry used simple hand tools to create furniture, buildings, and ships from wood that was carefully selected for its intended purpose. Different types of wood had different properties that made them suitable for specific uses. Oak was preferred for ship construction because of its strength and resistance to rot. Pine was used for ordinary construction because it was abundant and easy to work. Ancient Greek woodworking joints were cut entirely by hand and fitted together without nails or metal fasteners. Mortise and tenon joints were commonly used for furniture construction. Dovetail joints were employed for boxes and chests that needed to withstand stress. These joints had to be cut with great precision to ensure tight fits that would last for many years of use. Greek leatherworking transformed animal hides into shoes, belts, armor, and containers through a complex tanning process that took several months to complete. Hides were treated with materials containing tannins, usually bark from oak trees, which chemically converted rawhide into flexible, durable leather. The tanning process was labor-intensive and produced offensive odors that required tanneries to be located outside populated areas. Ancient Greek food preparation involved techniques and equipment that had remained unchanged for centuries. Cooking was done over open fires or in clay ovens that required constant attention to maintain proper temperatures. Most food was boiled or stewed because these methods required less fuel and skill than roasting. Grinding grain into flour was done with hand-operated stone querns that required considerable physical effort. Greek bread baking was a specialized skill that required understanding of fermentation, dough preparation, and oven management. Most families took their bread dough to commercial bakeries because few homes had ovens capable of baking bread properly. Professional bakers maintained large wood-fired ovens and had the expertise needed to produce consistent results. Ancient Greek brewing produced various types of fermented beverages from barley, wheat, and other grains. The brewing process involved malting grain by allowing it to sprout, then drying and grinding it into meal. This meal was mixed with water and allowed to ferment naturally with wild yeasts. The resulting beverages were consumed daily because they were safer than water and provided nutritional value. Greek cheesemaking utilized milk from goats and sheep to produce various types of cheese that could be consumed fresh or aged for longer storage. Fresh cheese was eaten within a few days of production. Aged cheese was treated with salt and stored in cool, dry places where it developed complex flavors over several months. Cheese was an important protein source and could be transported over long distances without spoiling. Ancient Greek fishing provided protein for coastal communities and was conducted using nets, hooks, traps, and spears from small boats that rarely ventured far from shore. Fishermen worked primarily at night and in early morning when fish were most active. The catch was brought ashore and sold immediately to prevent spoilage in the warm Mediterranean climate. Greek fish preservation was accomplished through salting, drying, or fermentation to create products that could be stored for extended periods. Salted fish was particularly important for inland communities that had no access to fresh seafood. Fish sauce, made by fermenting fish entrails with salt, was a popular condiment that added flavor to many dishes and provided essential nutrients. Ancient Greek hunting supplemented the diet with wild game and provided materials like leather and bone for various uses. Hunting required specialized knowledge of animal behavior and seasonal patterns. Different techniques were used for different types of game, from elaborate drives that involved entire communities to individual stalking of deer and wild boar. Greek beekeeping provided honey, the only sweetener available in ancient times, and beeswax for various industrial and household uses. Beekeepers understood the seasonal cycles of bee colonies and knew how to manage hives to maximize honey production. Honey collection was dangerous work that required protective clothing and specialized tools to avoid bee stings. Ancient Greek perfume and cosmetic production used locally available plants and imported materials to create products for personal hygiene and beauty enhancement. Olive oil served as a base for many cosmetic preparations. Various plant extracts provided colors and fragrances. These products were luxury items that were affordable only by wealthy families. Greek soap making used animal fats and ash to create cleaning agents for laundry and personal hygiene. The chemical process that created soap was not well understood, but the practical techniques had been developed through trial and error over many generations. Soap was expensive, and most people used other methods for cleaning themselves and their belongings. Ancient Greek glue production utilized materials like animal bones, hides, and plant resins to create adhesives for woodworking and other crafts. Different types of glue were needed for different applications, and craftsmen had to understand the properties of various adhesives. Glue making was a specialized skill that required knowledge of chemistry and materials, science that was passed down through apprenticeship systems. Ancient Greek athletic training was considered essential for developing both physical strength and moral character in young men. Every Greek city maintained a gymnasium where citizens exercised naked to achieve the physical perfection that Greeks believed reflected inner virtue. The gymnasium served not only as a place for physical training, but also as a center for intellectual discussion and social interaction among adult males. Greek athletic activities included running, wrestling, boxing, discus throwing, javelin throwing, and long jumping. These sports were designed to prepare young men for military service while demonstrating their physical excellence to the community. Training was supervised by professional coaches called pottery, who understood proper techniques conditioning methods, and dietary requirements for athletic development. Ancient Greek running events varied in distance and required different training approaches. The stadion was a sprint of approximately 200 meters that demanded explosive speed and perfect technique. The dialos covered twice that distance and required both speed and endurance. The Dolichos was a long-distance race that tested stamina and strategic pacing over multiple laps of the track. Greek wrestling was practiced on sand-covered grounds that provided cushioning for falls while allowing spectators to clearly see the action. Wrestlers covered their bodies with olive oil and then dusted themselves with fine sand to improve their grip on opponents. Matches continued until one participant was thrown to the ground 3 times or acknowledged defeat by raising his hand. Ancient Greek boxing was considerably more brutal than modern boxing, with fighters wearing only leather thongs wrapped around their hands and wrists for minimal protection. Matches had no time limits and continued until one fighter was unable to continue or acknowledge defeat. There were no weight classes, so smaller men often faced much larger opponents. Boxers required exceptional conditioning and pain tolerance. Greek discus throwing used heavy bronze or stone discs that weighed several pounds and required tremendous strength to throw effectively. Athletes developed specific techniques for generating maximum distance through coordinated body rotation and precise timing of release. The discus had to land within marked boundaries to count as a valid throw, adding an element of accuracy to the strength requirement. Ancient Greek javelin throwing employed lightweight spears designed specifically for distance competition rather than warfare. Throwers attached leather thongs called ankyl to improve their grip and add spin to the javelin for greater stability in flight. The javelin had to stick in the ground point first to count as a legal throw, requiring both power and precision from the athlete. Greek long jumping was always performed as part of the pentathlon and included the use of stone or metal weights called halters that jumpers held in their hands. The weights were swung forward during takeoff and backward during landing to increase distance and maintain balance. Jumpers landed in a pit filled with soft sand, and the jump was measured from the takeoff line to the nearest mark made by any part of the jumper's body. Ancient Greek athletic competitions were held regularly at local, regional, and pan-Hellenic levels, with the Olympic Games being the most prestigious. These competitions were religious festivals that honored specific gods and included elaborate ceremonies, sacrifices, and cultural events alongside the athletic contests. Victory in major competitions brought great honor to athletes and their home cities. Greek athletic festivals attracted participants and spectators from throughout the Greek world, creating temporary communities of thousands of people who required food, lodging, and entertainment. Local communities profited significantly from hosting major competitions, while athletes who achieved victory could expect valuable rewards from their grateful fellow citizens upon returning home. Ancient Greek theatrical performances combined entertainment with religious observance and civic education. Plays were performed during festivals honoring Dionysus, the god of wine and fertility, and dealt with serious themes from mythology and contemporary politics. Tragedies explored moral dilemmas and human suffering, while comedies provided satirical commentary on social issues and political figures. Greek theaters were large stone structures, built into natural hillsides that could accommodate thousands of spectators. The circular performance area, called the orchestra, was surrounded by tiered seating that provided excellent sightlines for the entire audience. Behind the orchestra stood a building called the scheme that served as a backdrop and provided space for actors to change costumes. Ancient Greek theatrical performances began at sunrise and continued throughout the day, with audiences bringing food and drink to sustain themselves during these marathon events. A typical festival featured 3 tragedies followed by a comedy, all performed by the same acting company. Weather conditions could not cancel performances, so spectators endured sun, rain, and wind to support their favorite playwright. Greek actors were always male and wore elaborate masks that identified their characters and projected their voices to distant audience members. The masks were carefully crafted to represent specific character types and emotional states. Costumes were colorful and exaggerated to be visible from the farthest seats. Leading actors were celebrities who commanded high fees and attracted devoted followings. Ancient Greek dramatic competitions were judged by panels of citizens chosen by lot from the tribal divisions of the city. Judges voted secretly to select winners in categories for Best Tragedy, Best Comedy, and Best Actor. Winning playwrights received valuable prizes and lasting fame. The best plays were copied and performed in other cities, spreading Athenian cultural influence throughout the Greek world. Greek music was an integral part of religious ceremonies, theatrical performances, and social gatherings, with different musical modes believed to have specific emotional and moral effects on listeners. Professional musicians performed at symposiums, weddings, religious festivals, and private parties. Musical education was considered essential for well-educated citizens and was included in the standard curriculum for young men. Ancient Greek musical instruments were crafted by skilled artisans using traditional techniques and materials. Lyres had wooden frames with strings made from animal intestines. Flutes were carved from wood, bone, or reed with carefully positioned finger holes. Percussion instruments included drums made from animal skins, stretched over wooden frames, and cymbals made from bronze. Greek musical notation was primitive compared to modern systems, consisting mainly of symbols that indicated pitch relationships rather than precise notes. Musicians relied heavily on memorization and oral tradition to learn and perform compositions. This system allowed for considerable improvisation and personal interpretation, but also meant that many musical compositions were lost when their performers died. Ancient Greek religious music accompanied sacrifices, processions, and temple ceremonies with hymns that praised specific deities and recounted their mythological deeds. Different gods were associated with particular musical styles and instruments. Musical competitions were held during religious festivals, with winners receiving recognition that could lead to employment in temples or wealthy households. Greek social dancing occurred at religious festivals, weddings, and private parties, with different dances appropriate for different occasions and social groups. Sacred dances were performed during religious ceremonies to honor the gods, and often included elaborate costumes and choreographed movements that told mythological stories. Secular dancing provided entertainment and social interaction, but followed established conventions regarding appropriate behavior. Ancient Greek education was designed to produce well-rounded citizens capable of participating effectively in the political, military, and cultural life of their communities. Education was primarily available to free male children from families that could afford the fees charged by private teachers. The educational process began around age 7 and continued into early adulthood, with different stages focusing on different skills and areas of knowledge. Greek elementary education emphasized the 3 fundamental skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic, which were considered essential for full participation in civic life. Students learned to read using wooden tablets covered with wax on which they could practice, writing letters and simple words with bronze styluses. The wax could be smoothed and reused many times, making these tablets economical for repeated practice. Ancient Greek writing. Instruction began with learning the 24 letters of the Greek alphabet, which had been adapted from the Phoenician writing system several centuries earlier. Students practiced writing individual letters until they achieved proper form, then progressed to syllables, words, and eventually complete sentences. Writing materials included expensive papyrus for important work and cheaper pottery shards for everyday practice. Greek reading instruction used classical literary works, particularly the epic poems of Homer, as textbooks that served multiple educational purposes. Students not only learned reading skills, but also absorbed cultural values, historical knowledge, and moral lessons contained in these foundational works. The Iliad and Odyssey were considered essential reading that every educated Greek should know thoroughly. Ancient Greek arithmetic instruction focused on practical, mathematical skills needed for commerce and daily life rather than abstract mathematical theory. Students learned basic operations using counting stones and simple calculating devices. More advanced students studied geometric principles used in construction and land surveying. Mathematical education was generally limited to what was necessary for practical applications. Greek musical education was considered crucial for developing character and cultural refinement in young citizens. Students learned to play the lyre, a stringed instrument that was portable and relatively easy to master. Musical instruction was combined with poetry to help students memorize and appreciate classical literature. The rhythmic patterns of music were believed to instill discipline and order in young minds. Ancient Greek physical education prepared boys for military service and athletic competition while promoting the ideal of physical beauty that was central to Greek culture. Training began with simple exercises and games, then progressed to more demanding activities including running, wrestling, and weapons training. Physical education was considered as important as intellectual development for producing complete citizens. Greek gymnastic training took place in specially designed facilities called gymnasiums that were found in every Greek city. These complexes included exercise areas, bathing facilities, and spaces for intellectual discussions. Men exercised naked, believing that clothing interfered with proper physical development and that nudity promoted honesty and equality among participants. Ancient Greek higher education was available to wealthy young men who could afford to study with famous philosophers, rhetoric, and other specialized teachers. Students often traveled to Athens, which was recognized as the intellectual center of the Greek world, to receive advanced instruction in philosophy, rhetoric, mathematics, astronomy, and natural science. Greek philosophical education taught students to think critically about fundamental questions concerning the nature of reality, ethics, and human knowledge. Students learned to examine their assumptions, construct logical arguments, and engage in reasoned debate about complex issues. Philosophical training was considered the highest form of education and the best preparation for leadership roles in society. Ancient Greek rhetorical education developed the speaking skills necessary for success in politics, law, and public life. Students learned to construct persuasive arguments, use emotional appeals effectively, and respond skillfully to opponents' objections. Rhetorical training involved memorizing model speeches, practicing delivery techniques, and participating in mock debates on various topics. Greek grammatical instruction analyzed the structure and usage of the Greek language to help students write and speak more effectively. Grammar was taught through the analysis of literary texts, with students learning to identify different parts of speech and understand complex sentence structures. This technical knowledge of language was considered essential for advanced education. Ancient Greek memorization played a crucial role in education because written materials were expensive and not widely available. Students were expected to memorize large portions of Homer's epics, traditional songs, and important speeches. This emphasis on memory training developed students' ability to retain and recall vast amounts of information. Throughout their lives, Greek educational discipline was strict, with teachers using physical punishment to maintain order and motivate learning. Students who failed to pay attention or complete their assignments could expect to be beaten with wooden rods. This harsh treatment was considered necessary for proper character development and was accepted by parents who wanted their children to receive a thorough education. Ancient Greek apprenticeship provided practical education for young people whose families could not afford formal schooling or who were destined for careers in crafts and trades. Apprentices worked alongside experienced craftsmen, learning skills through observation and hands-on practice. This system ensured that essential technical knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. Greek slave education varied considerably depending on the needs and resources of their owners. Some slaves received extensive training in specialized skills such as accounting, medicine, or teaching that made them more valuable and increased their owners' profits. These educated slaves often lived more comfortably than free citizens, and sometimes earned enough money to purchase their freedom. Ancient Greek women's education was generally limited to domestic skills and basic literacy, as women were not expected to participate in public, political, or intellectual life. Wealthy women learned to read and write, but received their primary training in household management, textile production, childcare, and religious observances. Some women became knowledgeable about medicine and served as healers and midwives in their communities. Greek library collections were rare and extremely valuable because books had to be copied by hand on expensive materials. The Great Library at Alexandria contained hundreds of thousands of scrolls covering all areas of human knowledge. But most cities had much smaller collections housed in temples or public buildings. Access to books was limited to wealthy individuals and serious scholars. Ancient Greek book production was a slow and expensive process performed by trained scribes who copied texts by hand. A single copy of a major work, like Homer's Iliad, could take months to complete and cost the equivalent of several years' wages for an ordinary worker. Copying errors were common and accumulated over time as scribes made copies from copies rather than original texts. Greek literacy rates were low by modern standards, with perhaps only 10 to 20% of the population able to read and write competently. Literacy was concentrated among wealthy urban males, while most women, rural inhabitants, and poor people remained illiterate throughout their lives. Most information was transmitted orally through speeches, conversations, and traditional stories passed down through generations. Ancient Greek educational theories emphasized the development of both intellectual and physical capabilities in harmonious balance. Educators believed that neglecting either aspect of human development would produce incomplete individuals unsuited for full participation in civic life. This holistic approach to education influenced educational philosophy for centuries and continues to affect modern educational practices. Ancient Greek religious life permeated every aspect of daily existence and provided the framework within which all other activities took place. The Greeks worshipped numerous gods and goddesses who controlled different aspects of human life and natural phenomena. Each city-state had its own patron deity who received special honor and protection, while individual households maintained shrines to gods who watched over family affairs. Greek temples served as houses for the gods rather than places where ordinary people gathered for communal worship. The most sacred part of each temple was the inner chamber called the naos, which contained a statue of the deity and could only be entered by priests during specific ceremonies. Worshippers gathered in courtyards outside the temple to participate in festivals and make personal offerings. Ancient Greek priests were not professional clergy but ordinary citizens who served temporary terms in religious offices. Priests were selected through various methods, including election, appointment, or drawing lots from among qualified candidates. Their duties included maintaining temple buildings, performing sacrificial rituals, conducting religious festivals, and interpreting omens and divine signs for the community. Greek religious festivals occurred throughout the year according to traditional calendars that varied among different cities. The most important festival in Athens was the Panathenea, which honored the goddess Athena with elaborate processions, athletic competitions, and dramatic performances. The festival of Dionysus featured theatrical presentations and religious ceremonies that lasted for several days. Ancient Greek sacrificial rituals followed strict procedures that had been established by centuries of tradition and religious law. Animals selected for sacrifice were decorated with ribbons and garlands, then led in procession to the altar where prayers were recited and the sacrifice was performed. The meat was distributed among participants according to social rank and religious requirements. Greek divination attempted to discover the will of the gods through careful observation and interpretation of various signs and omens. The most famous oracle was located at Delphi, where a priestess called the Pythia delivered prophecies while in a trance-like state, induced by sacred vapors rising from a crack in the earth. Other forms of divination included examining bird flight patterns and studying sacrificial entrails. Ancient Greek mystery religions offered initiate secret knowledge about the nature of the gods and prospects for life after death. The most famous mysteries were celebrated at Eleusis near Athens, where participants underwent elaborate initiation ceremonies that were kept so secret that modern scholars still do not fully understand what took place during these sacred rituals. Greek household religion focused on worship of family, ancestors, and protective spirits called household gods. Each home maintained a small altar where daily offerings of food, drink, and incense were made to these deities. Neglecting household religious duties was believed to bring misfortune upon the entire family, while proper observance ensured prosperity and protection from harm. Ancient Greek funeral practices reflected beliefs about the importance of proper burial for ensuring the peaceful rest of deceased souls. Bodies were washed, dressed in fine clothing, and displayed in the home for mourning before being carried to burial grounds outside the city walls. Professional mourners were hired to wail and sing laments that expressed the family's grief. Greek burial customs required that bodies be properly interred with appropriate ceremonies and grave goods too. ensure the comfort of the deceased in the afterlife. Graves were marked with stone monuments that recorded the person's name, family relationships, and achievements. Families visited graves regularly to make offerings of food and drink that nourished the spirits of their ancestors. Ancient Greek concepts of afterlife varied among different groups, time periods, and philosophical schools. Popular beliefs held that souls traveled to Hades, a shadowy underworld where they existed as pale shadows of their former selves. Mystery religions promised initiates more pleasant destinations, while philosophers developed theories about reincarnation and the immortality of the soul. Greek religious law governed many aspects of daily behavior and established penalties for violations of sacred obligations. Certain days were considered holy and prohibited most forms of work and business activity. Blasphemy against the gods was punishable by death, exile, or heavy fines. Religious pollution from contact with corpses or blood required ritual purification before normal activities could resume. Ancient Greek sacred spaces included not only temples but also natural sites such as groves, springs, and caves that were believed to be inhabited by gods and spirits. These places were protected from human interference by religious law and community custom. Trees could not be cut, and animals could not be hunted in sacred groves without risking divine punishment. Greek religious education taught children the traditional myths and stories that explained the origins of the world and provided moral guidance for proper behavior. Parents and teachers used these stories to instruct children about the power of the gods, the importance of piety, and the consequences of impious actions. Religious knowledge was considered essential for developing good character and citizenship. Ancient Greek religious festivals provided structure for community life and opportunities for social bonding among citizens. Each month brought different celebrations that honored various deities with appropriate ceremonies, entertainment, and feasting. These festivals reinforced shared values, strengthened community identity, and provided relief from the routine demands of daily work. Greek religious processions were elaborate public displays of devotion that involved entire communities in colorful ceremonies. Participants wore special clothing and carried sacred objects through city streets while musicians played. Hymns and dancers performed choreographed routines. These processions demonstrated the community's devotion to patron deities and reinforced social hierarchies through assigned roles and positions. Ancient Greek religious offerings ranged from simple food items and personal possessions to expensive animals and precious objects, depending on the worshipper's wealth and the importance of their request. Wealthy citizens made costly offerings to demonstrate their piety and social status, while poor people offered what they could afford. The gods were believed to appreciate sincere devotion regardless of the monetary value of offerings. Greek religious purification rituals were required after contact with death, childbirth, or other potentially polluting circumstances. These ceremonies involved washing with special water, reciting prescribed prayers, and sometimes making additional sacrifices. Purification was necessary before entering temples, participating in religious festivals, or resuming normal social activities within the community. Ancient Greek religious oaths were sworn in the presence of gods who would punish those who violated their promises. Business contracts, legal testimony, marriage agreements, and political treaties were sealed with religious oaths that invoked divine protection and punishment. The fear of supernatural retribution encouraged honest dealing and helped maintain social trust and cooperation. Greek religious healing involved prayers, offerings, and pilgrimages to shrines dedicated to gods who specialized in medical cures. The god Asclepius was particularly associated with healing and maintained temples throughout the Greek world where sick people came seeking divine intervention. Patients slept in temple courtyards, hoping to receive healing dreams or miraculous cures. Ancient Greek seasonal activities followed natural rhythms that had governed Mediterranean life for countless generations. Each season brought specific tasks and challenges that required careful planning, community cooperation, and adaptation to changing weather conditions. The success of seasonal work determined whether families and communities would prosper or struggle during the coming year. Greek spring activities began with the gradual warming of weather and lengthening of daylight, hours that signaled the end of winter's restrictions on outdoor work. Farmers examined their tools and equipment, repairing damage caused by winter storage and preparing for the intensive labor of the planting season. Seeds saved from the previous harvest were sorted and tested to ensure good germination rates. Ancient Greek spring planting required precise timing based on traditional knowledge of weather patterns, soil conditions, and plant biology that had been accumulated over centuries of agricultural experience. Seeds planted too early risked destruction by late frosts, while seeds planted too late might not have sufficient time to mature before the hot, dry summer weather arrived. Greek spring festivals celebrated the renewal of life and fertility that characterized this season of hope and new beginnings. The festival of Anthesteria honored Dionysus with ceremonies that included the opening of new wine containers and the decoration of children with flowers. These celebrations combine religious observance with community bonding and provided welcome relief from winter's isolation and hardship. Ancient Greek summer brought the most intensive agricultural work of the year, as crops required constant attention during their critical growing period. Weeding was a daily necessity that occupied entire families for long hours under the hot Mediterranean sun. Fields had to be protected from birds, insects, and grazing animals that could destroy months of careful cultivation. Greek summer harvest began with barley in late spring and continued with wheat in early summer, requiring the participation of entire communities in gathering grain before it could be lost to storms, pests, or overripeness. The timing of harvest was critical because grain left too long in the field would fall from the stalks and be lost, while grain cut too early would not have reached full maturity. Ancient Greek threshing followed the grain harvest and involved beating cut grain with wooden flails to separate kernels from stalks. This work was performed on hard, flat surfaces where the grain could be beaten thoroughly and the separated kernels could be easily collected. Threshing was dusty, exhausting work that required many workers laboring in shifts throughout the hot summer days. Greek winnowing removed chaff and debris from threshed grain by tossing it into the air on windy days, allowing the breeze to blow away light chaff, while heavier grain kernels fell to the ground. This process required favorable weather conditions and considerable skill to achieve clean separation. Poor winnowing resulted in grain that was difficult to store and susceptible to spoilage. Ancient Greek grape harvest occurred in early autumn when the fruit reached optimal ripeness for wine production. Grapes were picked by hand and transported in baskets to pressing areas where they were crushed immediately to begin fermentation. The grape harvest was a community celebration that combined essential work with social interaction, storytelling, and traditional songs. Greek wine production followed immediately after grape harvest, with families working together to crush grapes and manage the fermentation process that would determine the quality of wine available for the coming year. Grape juice was stored in large ceramic containers, where natural yeasts converted sugars into alcohol over a period of several weeks that required careful monitoring. Ancient Greek olive harvest took place in late autumn and early winter, when the fruit had reached full maturity and maximum oil content. Olives were beaten from trees using long poles and collected in baskets spread beneath the branches. This method sometimes damaged trees, but was the most efficient way to gather large quantities of fruit in the limited time available. Greek olive oil production involved crushing harvested olives in stone mills and pressing the resulting paste to extract oil. Multiple pressings were performed, with the first yielding the highest quality oil for cooking and personal use. Later, pressings produced lower grades suitable for lamps and industrial purposes. The entire process required specialized equipment and skilled workers. Ancient Greek autumn festivals celebrated successful harvests and prepared communities for the challenges of winter. Religious ceremonies thanked the gods for their bounty and sought divine protection during the coming months of cold weather and limited food supplies. These festivals included communal feasting that strengthened social bonds and distributed food to needy community members. Greek winter activities focused on indoor work and maintenance, tasks that could be performed during the cold, wet weather that made outdoor labor difficult or impossible. Men repaired tools, furniture, and buildings, while women spun wool and wove cloth for clothing and household use. Children learned skills by helping adults with age-appropriate tasks during long winter evenings. Ancient Greek winter entertainment included storytelling sessions where older family members shared traditional tales, historical accounts, and moral lessons with younger generations. Professional entertainers visited wealthy households to perform music, recite poetry, and present dramatic performances. Families played board games and gambling games to pass time during the long, dark evenings. Greek winter food management relied heavily on preserved foods that had been prepared during harvest season. Families consumed stored grain, dried fruits, salted meat, and aged cheese while carefully rationing supplies to last until spring brought fresh food sources. Proper storage techniques were crucial for preventing spoilage that could lead to starvation during the lean months. Ancient Greek seasonal clothing reflected both practical needs and available materials. Summer garments were lightweight and loose-fitting to provide cooling in hot weather, while winter clothing included heavy woolen cloaks and additional layers for warmth. Seasonal clothing changes marked important transitions in the yearly cycle and provided opportunities for social display and community interaction. Greek seasonal migration patterns affected both human populations and livestock herds that moved between different grazing areas according to weather conditions and pasture availability. Shepherds followed ancient routes that connected summer mountain pastures with winter lowland grazing areas. These migrations required detailed knowledge of geography, weather patterns, and animal behavior. Ancient Greek seasonal religious observances marked important transitions in the agricultural and social calendar, with ceremonies appropriate to each time of year. Different gods were honored at specific seasons: Demeter during grain harvest, Dionysus during grape harvest and wine production, and various household gods during winter months when families spent more time indoors. Greek seasonal work patterns created complex interdependencies between different social classes and occupational groups. Wealthy landowners depended on seasonal laborers during planting and harvest times, while urban craftsmen timed their activities to coincide with agricultural cycles that determined when rural customers had money to spend on manufactured goods. Ancient Greek seasonal health challenges reflected environmental conditions and dietary changes that affected human well-being throughout the year. Summer heat brought risks of dehydration and heat exhaustion, while winter cold increased susceptibility to respiratory ailments. Seasonal variations in food availability affected nutrition and energy levels, requiring careful management of diet and activity. Ancient Greek medicine was based on careful observation of symptoms combined with theoretical understanding of human physiology that had been developed by generations of practitioners. Greek physicians created systematic approaches to diagnosis and treatment that influenced medical practice throughout the ancient world and beyond. However, their knowledge was limited by restrictions on human dissection and lack of scientific instruments. Greek medical theory centered on the concept of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, which were believed to govern human health and temperament. Disease was thought to result from imbalances among these humours caused by factors such as diet, climate, emotional stress, or divine displeasure. Treatment involved restoring proper humoral balance through various therapeutic interventions. Ancient Greek physicians used dietary therapy as a primary form of medical treatment, believing that different foods possessed heating or cooling properties that could correct humoral imbalances. Barley porridge was prescribed for patients with fever because of its supposed cooling nature. Wine was recommended for depression because of its warming and stimulating effects. Dietary prescriptions required extensive knowledge of food properties and individual patient constitutions. Greek bloodletting was practiced to reduce excess blood and restore humoral equilibrium in patients with various ailments. Physicians made small incisions in veins to release blood or applied leeches to remove blood without cutting the skin. The amount of blood removed depended on the patient's age, constitution, and condition. While sometimes beneficial, bloodletting often weakened patients who were already ill. Ancient Greek purging used medicinal plants to induce vomiting or diarrhea for removing excess bile from the body. Purging agents included hellebore for mental disorders and scamney for digestive problems. The timing and intensity of purging had to be carefully controlled to achieve therapeutic benefits without harming the patient. Excessive purging could cause dangerous dehydration and electrolyte imbalances. Greek surgical procedures were limited by lack of effective anesthesia and antiseptic techniques, but some operations were surprisingly sophisticated for the time period. Surgeons could set broken bones, remove kidney stones, treat dislocated joints, and perform cataract surgery. However, most patients died from shock, blood loss, or post-operative infections, so surgery was attempted only when death seemed certain. Ancient Greek obstetrics and gynecology were practiced primarily by women who served as midwives and female healers. Childbirth was extremely dangerous for both mothers and babies, with many women dying from complications during delivery or from infections afterward. Midwives provided what assistance they could, but they lacked understanding of sterile technique and had no effective pain relief methods. Greek dental care was primitive and largely limited to tooth extraction. When pain became unbearable, dental decay was common due to dietary factors and poor oral hygiene practices. Tooth extraction was performed without anesthesia using crude forceps, making it an extremely painful ordeal. Some practitioners attempted to clean teeth and treat gum disease, but with limited success. Ancient Greek pharmacology utilized hundreds of plant, animal, and mineral substances as medicines, with physicians required to understand which materials to use for specific conditions and how to prepare them properly. Many medicinal plants possessed genuine therapeutic value, while others were prescribed based on theoretical beliefs about their properties rather than proven effectiveness. Greek medical education was conducted through apprenticeship rather than formal schools, with students learning by observing experienced physicians and gradually assuming more responsibility for patient care. Medical knowledge was transmitted through written texts and oral tradition, but the quality of training varied greatly among different practitioners and regions. Ancient Greek public health measures included some effective practices despite limited understanding of disease transmission. Cities constructed sewers and aqueducts to provide clean water and remove waste. Public baths promoted personal hygiene, while gymnasiums encouraged physical fitness. However, overcrowding and poor sanitation in urban areas facilitated the spread of infectious diseases. Greek mental health concepts attributed psychological disorders to various causes, including divine punishment, humoral imbalances, and emotional trauma. Treatment might involve religious rituals, herbal medicines, dietary changes, or physical restraint for violent patients. Some physicians recognized connections between mental and physical health and treated patients with approaches that addressed both aspects of illness. Ancient Greek disability posed significant challenges in a society that valued physical perfection and military capability. Children born with severe disabilities were sometimes abandoned or killed, while adults who became disabled through accident or disease faced social stigma and economic hardship. However, some disabled individuals found ways to contribute to society through intellectual or artistic achievements. Greek occupational health hazards were numerous and poorly understood by contemporary standards. Miners suffered from lung diseases caused by dust inhalation, while metal workers were exposed to toxic fumes from lead and mercury. Farmers risked injuries from tools and animals, sailors faced storms and shipwrecks, and soldiers confronted wounds and infections on battlefields. Ancient Greek personal hygiene practices were more advanced than in many contemporary societies, with wealthy Greeks bathing regularly in private facilities or public baths. They used olive oil to cleanse their skin before scraping it off with curved metal tools called However, soap was unknown, and bathing facilities were not available to poor people who rarely washed their entire bodies. Greek parasite infestations were common health problems that affected people of all social classes. Intestinal worms were widespread due to poor sanitation and contaminated food. Lice and fleas infested clothing and bedding, while bedbugs made sleep uncomfortable. Greeks accepted parasites as normal aspects of life and had few effective treatments for controlling these pests. Ancient Greek epidemic diseases periodically devastated urban populations, with plague, smallpox, typhus, and other infectious diseases spreading rapidly through crowded cities. Medical knowledge was largely powerless against these epidemics, which were often attributed to divine anger. People fled to the countryside when possible, while trade and normal social activities were severely disrupted. Greek medical ethics were influenced by religious beliefs and philosophical principles that emphasized the physician's duty to help patients and avoid causing harm. The famous Hippocratic Oath established standards for medical practice that included maintaining patient confidentiality, avoiding sexual relationships with patients, and refusing to perform procedures beyond one's competence. Ancient Greek folk medicine existed alongside professional medical practice, with common people using traditional remedies passed down through families and communities. These treatments often involved combinations of herbal preparations, magical rituals, and religious observances. Some folk remedies possessed genuine therapeutic value, while others were harmless but ineffective. Greek medical literature preserved and transmitted medical knowledge across generations through works attributed to Hippocrates and other physicians. These texts described disease symptoms, treatment methods, and case studies based on clinical observations. Medical manuscripts were copied by hand and studied by physicians throughout the ancient world. Though copying errors sometimes corrupted the original information, ancient Greek life expectancy was significantly shorter than modern standards, with high rates of infant and child mortality due to infectious diseases, malnutrition, and lack of effective medical care. Adults who survived childhood faced constant threats from injury, illness, and epidemic diseases. However, some Greeks achieved remarkable longevity despite these challenges, suggesting that genetics and lifestyle factors played important roles in determining individual health outcomes. Ancient Greek trade networks connected cities throughout the Mediterranean world and established commercial relationships that were essential for Greek prosperity. Greek merchants traveled by sea and land to exchange goods that could not be produced locally, creating economic interdependencies that linked distant regions and diverse cultures. These trading relationships provided Greeks with essential raw materials while spreading Greek influence throughout the known world. Greek maritime commerce was conducted using wooden ships, powered by a combination of sails and oars that could carry substantial cargoes across long distances. Despite their relatively small size, navigation was accomplished through observation of stars, coastal landmarks, and traditional knowledge passed down through generations of sailors. Maritime trade was dangerous due to storms, pirates, and navigational hazards, but it offered the fastest and most economical means of long-distance transportation. Ancient Greek trading expeditions required substantial financial investments that were often provided by wealthy individuals or partnerships that shared both risks and profits. These financing arrangements distributed the considerable risks associated with long-distance commerce, as ships could be lost to storms, pirates, or other disasters. Successful expeditions generated enormous profits that could make investors very wealthy, while failed ventures could result in financial ruin. Greek merchants specialized in particular types of goods or specific trade routes, developing expertise in business relationships that provided competitive advantages. Some merchants focused on luxury items such as silk from China, spices from India, or precious metals from various sources. Others dealt in bulk commodities like grain from the Black Sea region, olive oil from Greece, or wine from different Mediterranean areas. Ancient Greek banking services supported long-distance trade by providing credit, currency exchange, and money transfer services that facilitated commercial transactions across political boundaries. Bankers charged fees for these services and earned profits by lending money at interest rates that varied according to risk assessments. Banking was inherently risky because there was no government insurance or regulation to protect depositors or borrowers. Greek currency systems were based primarily on silver and bronze coins that were minted by individual city-states using their own distinctive designs and weight standards. Each city's coins served as symbols of political independence and economic prosperity. Money changes in major commercial centers determined exchange rates and converted foreign currencies, providing essential services for international trade. Ancient Greek weights and measures varied significantly among different cities, creating complications for merchants engaged in intercity commerce. Standard measurements had to be negotiated for each transaction, and disputes over quantities were common sources of conflict. Some cities appointed official inspectors to verify the accuracy of weights and measures used in their markets, but enforcement was often inconsistent. Greek market regulations attempted to prevent fraud and ensure fair trading practices through various rules and oversight mechanisms. Officials inspected goods offered for sale, verified the honesty of merchants' claims, and collected taxes on commercial transactions. Import duties were charged on foreign goods, while export taxes were levied on local products sold to other cities. However, corruption and favoritism often undermined these regulatory efforts. Ancient Greek slavery provided much of the labor force needed for production and trade throughout the Greek world. Slaves worked in mines extracting precious metals, on farms producing agricultural goods, in workshops manufacturing pottery and textiles, and as crew members on merchant vessels. The availability of slave labor kept production costs low and made Greek goods competitive in international markets. Greek slave trading was itself a profitable business that connected many different regions and provided workers for expanding economies. Slaves were acquired through warfare, raids on neighboring territories, purchase from barbarian tribes, or breeding in captivity. They were sold in specialized markets and transported to areas where labor was needed most urgently, generating substantial profits for traders. Ancient Greek manufacturing was organized around small workshops rather than large factories, with master craftsmen working alongside apprentices and slaves to produce pottery, metalwork, textiles, and other goods. Production capacity was limited by available tools, power sources, and traditional techniques. Quality control depended on the reputation and skill of individual craftsmen, rather than standardized processes. Greek pottery production was a major industry that supplied both domestic markets and export trade, with Athenian pottery particularly prized throughout the Mediterranean world for its artistic quality and technical excellence. Pottery workshops employed dozens of workers who specialized in different aspects of production, from preparing clay and shaping vessels to painting decorative designs and managing kilners. Ancient Greek textile production was primarily organized around household manufacturing controlled by women, though some cities developed commercial textile industries that produced cloth for export markets. These workshops employed large numbers of female slaves who worked under harsh conditions to produce various types of fabric. Textile production required considerable skill and experience to create high-quality materials. Greek metalworking produced tools, weapons, jewelry, and coins using bronze, iron, silver, and gold extracted from mines located throughout the Greek world and imported from distant regions. Metalworkers had to understand complex processes for refining raw materials, creating alloys with specific properties, and shaping finished products. The quality of metal goods depended on both material purity and craftsman skill. Ancient Greek mining operations extracted silver, lead, copper, iron, and other metals from deposits found in various locations. The famous silver mines at Laurium near Athens provided much of the wealth that supported Athenian naval power and cultural achievements. Mining was extremely dangerous work, performed mainly by slaves who faced constant risks of cave-ins, flooding, and poisoning from toxic substances. Greek construction industries built temples, theaters, houses, and fortifications using stone, wood, and other materials that required coordination among many different crafts and skills. Large construction projects like major temples could take decades to complete and employed hundreds of workers, including architects, stonemasons, carpenters, sculptors, and laborers. These projects demonstrated civic wealth and religious devotion while providing employment for many citizens. Ancient Greek shipbuilding was a specialized industry that produced vessels for both military and commercial purposes, using techniques that had been refined over centuries. Warships required different design features than merchant vessels, with warships emphasizing speed and maneuverability, while merchant ships prioritized cargo capacity and seaworthiness. Shipbuilding required enormous quantities of high-quality timber and skilled craftsmen. Greek food processing industries transformed agricultural products into forms suitable for consumption and long-distance trade. Olive oil production required specialized equipment and knowledge to extract oil efficiently and maintain quality. Winemaking involved complex fermentation processes that determined final product characteristics. Grain processing included milling flour and baking bread that supplied urban populations. Ancient Greek transportation systems moved people and goods between cities using roads, rivers, and sea routes that connected major commercial centers. Land transport was slow and expensive due to poor road conditions and security threats from bandits. Sea transport was faster and more economical but riskier due to storms and piracy. Transportation costs significantly affected the prices and availability of traded goods. Greek quality control in manufacturing relied on guild regulations, customer expectations, and market competition rather than formal standardization processes. Craftsmen who produced inferior goods risked losing their reputations and customers, while those who maintained high standards could command premium prices. Some cities appointed inspectors to check the quality of goods intended for export, but standards varied widely among different producers and regions. Ancient Greek business ethics were governed by customary practices, religious beliefs, and community expectations rather than formal legal codes. Merchants were expected to deal honestly with customers and business partners, honor their agreements, and maintain fair prices. However, cheating and fraud were persistent problems that damaged trust and created disputes. Reputation was extremely important for long-term business success, and merchants who gained reputations for dishonesty found it difficult to conduct profitable trade. Ancient Greek evening routines began as the sun descended toward the western horizon and the day's work gradually came to an end. The approach of evening was marked by the return of farmers from their fields, craftsmen from their workshops, and merchants from the agora. Families gathered in their homes to share the main meal of the day and participate in social activities that strengthened household bonds and maintained cultural traditions. Greek evening meals represented the most important social events of each day, providing opportunities for families to come together and share both food and conversation. The main meal, called deipnon, was typically eaten in late afternoon or early evening when the heat of the day had passed and people could dine in comfort. Family members reclined on couches arranged around low tables and ate from common dishes. Ancient Greek dining customs reflected deeply ingrained social hierarchies and cultural values that governed all aspects of daily life. The head of the household occupied the position of honor and was served first, while other family members received food according to their status within the family structure. Women and children often ate separately from adult males in traditional households that maintained strict gender divisions. Greek symposiums were exclusive evening social gatherings for adult males that combined dining with intellectual conversation in elaborate rituals that reinforced social bonds and cultural values. These events followed complex customs and procedures that had been established over centuries. Participants reclined on couches arranged around the dining room, while slaves served food and beverages mixed with water in specific proportions. Ancient Greek symposium activities included poetry, recitation, philosophical discussions, musical performances, and various games that provided both entertainment and intellectual stimulation. Participants took turns speaking on assigned topics, improvising verses, or engaging in debates about political and philosophical issues. Professional entertainers might be hired to perform songs, dances, or dramatic presentations for the guests. Enjoyment. Greek evening entertainment for families included storytelling sessions where older members shared traditional tales that preserved cultural heritage and moral instruction. Children learned family history, mythological stories, and ethical lessons through these evening narratives. Musical instruments like lyres and flutes provided accompaniment for singing traditional songs that connected families to their cultural roots. Ancient Greek domestic work often continued into the evening hours when oil lamps provided sufficient illumination for certain activities. Women spun wool into thread and wove cloth for clothing and household needs. Men repaired tools and equipment or worked on craft projects. Children helped with appropriate tasks while learning essential skills through observation and practice. Greek oil lamps were small ceramic vessels that burned olive oil through wicks made from twisted plant fibers, providing the primary source of artificial lighting for evening activities. The quality of illumination was dim and flickering compared to modern standards, making detailed work difficult and potentially dangerous. Lamp oil was expensive, so families used artificial lighting sparingly and carefully. Ancient Greek evening prayers and religious observances concluded each day with expressions of gratitude to the gods for protection and blessings received. Household shrines received small offerings of food and drink, while family members participated in simple ceremonies that reinforced religious beliefs and cultural traditions. These daily observances maintained spiritual connections and provided comfort during difficult times. Greek bedtime preparations were relatively simple but followed established routines that prepared family members for sleep and ensured household security during the night. People washed their hands and faces with water from ceramic basins, removed their outer garments, and arranged clothing for the following day. Children received final instructions and blessings from parents before settling down for the night. Ancient Greek sleeping arrangements reflected practical considerations related to warmth, security, and available space, rather than modern concepts of privacy and individual comfort. Most family members shared beds or sleeping areas, with parents sleeping alongside young children and older siblings sharing accommodations. Slaves slept wherever space was available, often in kitchens or storage areas. Greek beds were simple constructions, consisting of wooden frames with rope or leather supports that held mattresses stuffed with straw, wool, or feathers, depending on the family's economic status. Wealthy households owned more elaborate beds with decorative carvings and expensive bedding materials. Blankets and coverlets provided warmth during cold weather, while lighter coverings sufficed during summer months. Ancient Greek night security required careful attention to potential dangers, including burglars, wild animals, and other threats that might endanger sleeping families. House doors were secured with heavy wooden bars placed across the inside, while shutters covered window openings. Valuable items were hidden or locked in wooden chests, and some families kept dogs to alert them to intruders. Greek seasonal variations in evening routines reflected changing patterns of daylight and weather conditions throughout the year. Summer evenings were long and warm, allowing for extended outdoor activities and social interactions. Winter evenings were short and cold, forcing families to spend more time indoors, gathered around fires for warmth and light. These seasonal changes affected both work patterns and social activities. Ancient Greek night sounds included the calls of nocturnal birds and animals, the barking of neighborhood dogs, and occasional sounds of late travelers passing through the streets. These familiar sounds could provide reassurance that all was normal, while unusual noises might indicate potential dangers requiring investigation. Families learned to distinguish between normal night sounds and those that might signal threats. Greek concepts of dreams and sleep were influenced by religious beliefs that attributed special significance to nocturnal experiences. Dreams were often interpreted as messages from gods or deceased ancestors, providing guidance or warnings about future events. People paid careful attention to their dreams and often sought interpretation from priests or wise individuals who specialized in understanding divine communications. Ancient Greek night emergencies could include medical crises, fires, criminal attacks, or natural disasters that required immediate response despite the darkness and limited visibility. Families prepared for these possibilities by maintaining emergency supplies, knowing evacuation procedures, and having plans for protecting children and valuables. However, darkness made emergency responses more difficult and dangerous. Then during daylight hours, Greek sleep patterns adapted to natural cycles of light and darkness that varied according to seasons and geographic location. People typically went to bed shortly after sunset to conserve expensive lamp oil and woke before dawn to begin daily activities. Sleep was often interrupted during long winter nights, with people spending wakeful periods in prayer, conversation, or light work before returning to sleep. Ancient Greek evening work productivity was necessarily limited by poor artificial lighting and fatigue from daytime labor, but certain tasks could be performed effectively by lamplight. Simple textile work like spinning could continue after dark, as could food preparation, activities, and basic household maintenance. These evening work sessions provided productive use of time when outdoor activities were impossible. Greek time awareness during evening hours relied on natural phenomena and traditional practices rather than precise mechanical measurements. The positions of stars and constellations indicated approximate times during clear nights, while most families developed internal rhythms that coordinated their activities without need for exact timing. Evening activities followed customary patterns rather than rigid schedules. Ancient Greek family conversations during evening hours provided opportunities for discussing daily events, planning future activities, and maintaining relationships between family members. These discussions helped coordinate household activities, resolved disputes, and transmitted important information about community affairs. Evening conversations also served educational purposes, as older family members shared knowledge and wisdom with younger generations. Greek evening leisure activities varied according to social class and available resources, but most families found ways to entertain themselves despite limited options. Wealthy households might employ professional musicians or storytellers, while ordinary families relied on their own talents for entertainment. Simple games, riddles, and contests provided amusement while strengthening family bonds through shared activities. Ancient Greek seasonal evening routines adapted to changing weather conditions and daylight patterns that affected both indoor and outdoor activities. Summer evenings allowed for social gatherings in courtyards and gardens, while winter evenings required families to huddle around fires for warmth. These seasonal variations created natural rhythms that connected human activities to the larger cycles of nature. Greek community evening activities sometimes brought neighbors together for shared entertainment, religious observances, or mutual assistance during times of crisis. Village festivals, religious ceremonies,